Good afternoon, and everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Eric, the Associate Director of FIU in Washington, D.C., where I normally am, though between you and me, if you don't tell anyone, I'm reporting live from Hialeah today, so maybe not so far from some of you. Michael, are you from Hialeah that you're reacting like that?
I was born and raised in Hialeah, man. I was born in Hialeah Hospital.
I came all the way to Hialeah to represent your hometown for this
Yeah,
event.
I've lived by West 68th Street for almost my entire life. So
Awesome.
yeah, big up to Hialeah. Yeah.
Really representing Miami in the DC area, which is what FIU in DC is all about. Today's session at Washington Careers for Engineers is meant to focus on the fact that there are careers for engineers in Washington. If you happen to already be subscribed to our Talent Lab newsletter, yesterday's edition was all about how Washington has something for all majors. There's a great FIU news story that went up yesterday from one of our current Hamilton scholars, undergraduate students who's a biology major, talking about how she realized that she belongs in Washington as a biology major. We think engineering students belong in Washington. That's what today is all about. I'd like to give a special shout out for any engineering students who happen to be participating in the BEA conference this week. The genesis of this event is that every year we like to do something special for students who are going to the BEA job fair through the College of Engineering and Computing. So if you are doing that, welcome. And then we also wanted everyone who is interested in meeting these great panelists to be here. So welcome to everyone else as well. If this is your first FIU in DC interaction, a little bit about us. We operate basically three pillars. We act as advocates for FIU researchers and students to the federal government, especially Congress, making sure that our elected officials know the great work that researchers are producing and can support that work in their legislation. We convene thought leaders from think tanks and federal agencies and advocacy organizations through our idea exchange. And I run the Talent Lab. The Talent Lab is all of the programs that we have to support our students and alumni in their DC career goals, programs, many of which Michael participated in on his path to his career today that you'll be hearing about. In just a few moments, we'll be talking to both of our guests, Sirisha Bandla, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Virgin Galactic, and Michael Lopez, who's an FIU alumnus and an optical engineer at NASA. And I'll have them talk a little bit about how they got to those roles and their experience studying engineering. Momentarily, I do want to make sure that you all know about one of our Talent Lab programs, one of our 3-day policy seminars. This is open for a few more days until the 22nd, I believe, to apply. It's called The Future of Environmental Resilience, Economic Growth, and National Security. All of our fly-in seminars include interactions with congressional offices, federal agencies, think tanks, corporate lobbyists, and advocacy organizations. And so if you care about any of these three topics or how they intersect with environment and the economy, the environment and national security and the economy, for example, you're going to want to go to flyin.fiu.edu, read more about this and apply if you're interested. And I will say for any folks who are engineering majors in the call today, of which I believe many of you are, one reason that we took this national security angle is that our good friends at MITRE, a company that runs federally funded research and development centers, does a lot of work on the intersection of the environment and national security. And I might just be planning to have them around this seminar a bit to get them interested in hiring FIU students. So, and most of their positions are for engineering students. So you might want to be around for that. flyin.fiu.edu. So how this is going to work is I would love everyone who's here as a participant to take some time and give us a brief introduction in the chat. What drew you to this particular topic today? What your goals and passions are? If you are attending the BEA conference the rest of this week, feel free to mention that. You can ask questions in the chat at any time. I have a few of my own questions prepared to go for a little bit until there's enough questions, but I especially for such a career-focused event for a discipline like engineering that I'm not an engineer, I'd rather most of the students questions come from you all. So put them in the chat at any time. I will ask you to read them. I'll call on you to read them to our panelists because I would like our panelists to see and hear you if you're available to do so. If you're at work or something and need me to read it, just let me know. But I'd love for them to see and hear you. Put them in the chat at any time so that I know you have those questions. That's how I'm going to know there are questions. So in the meantime, I look forward to some introductions. So please, introduce yourselves in the chat. The panelists will be reading them, I'll highlight some of them as well. But I am going to go ahead and ask our panelists a little bit about their career paths. This is all about engineering careers in the DC area. Both of you have an engineering background. Both of you are in the DC area. One of you is currently working as an engineer. The other is in a different sort of role that you can describe. But I'll go with Sirisha first because Michael and I have a relationship where he'll be okay with me letting him go second. Can you tell us a little bit how you ended up in your current role? Especially from the perspective of college students, is it very different from what you pictured you'd be doing as an undergraduate? How did your college experience in particular contribute to where you are today?
Yeah, so I had a very interesting path to where I am today. I didn't expect I'd be doing policy. So I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. So that's literally why I'm in this industry. I also have very bad eyesight. So around high school is when my eyesight got to pass the requirements that NASA had for astronauts. And at that time, actually, I still don't know. LASIK wasn't allowed to meet the eyesight requirements. So I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do because I've always wanted to be an astronaut. And then around that time, the Anasari X Prize happened. So if people aren't familiar with the Anasari X Prize, it was a privately funded competition to get humans to space by private companies. And Spaceship One won the Anasari X Prize, and I saw it happen. And I saw Richard Branson meet the spacecraft at the runway and open a bottle of champagne and say he's going to start Virgin Galactic and start this company to send people to space. And so I was like, okay, I want to work for Virgin Galactic in high school. So then, of course, I was like, okay, to do that, I should be an engineer, aerospace engineer. Went to Purdue to become an aerospace engineer. After that, I worked as a structures engineer at L3, which is, I know it does a lot of things, but I worked on military aircraft for L3. And while I was there, a professor from Purdue called me and said, hey, there's this job opening in Washington, D.C. It's not engineering, it's policy. He's like, but come do it. You could do it for 2 years and then go back to engineering. Virgin Galactic is one of the companies that is a part of this trade association that I was going to go work at. So not knowing anything about policy, I dropped everything and went to DC and joined the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which is the industry association. Learned about policy on the job, kind of did the fake it till you make it route. And afterward, I was able to convince Virgin Galactic to hire me because and that's another story in itself, which we can talk about later, how that happened, because that was also not traditional. But after the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, I did end up joining Virgin Galactic, and I ended up joining them in the DC office because I did grow to really like what I was doing, the policy side, and they did want someone with a technical background because I work with the FAA and we talk about licensing, we talk about our systems. I work with NASA, and in the same sense, they want to know the details and the safety of our systems so that they're able to carry payloads and hopefully humans in the future. So they did want someone with a technical background, even if they weren't doing engineering actively. So joined Virgin Galactic and then kind of worked my way up to now lead the government affairs office. So definitely not a traditional and definitely not a linear route. But I think the lesson here is never say no to an opportunity because you never know what's going to take you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the story and extracting the lesson out of it. I was going to make sure to try to pull that lesson out of what you were saying as well, since the two folks who have introduced themselves so far are engineering majors, one mechanical engineering and one computer science, which is part of our College of Engineering and Computing. So it definitely sounds like you were not necessarily planning to stray from a fully engineering job, but took that opportunity and were able to put your technical skills to use in that role in a way that somebody who knew I want to work in policy and I was a congressional intern and I'm going to try to get hired by Virgin Galactic might not have been able to do without that technical knowledge. Michael, so I know that many of the engineering students will want to work directly in engineering roles. Can we hear a little bit about your path?
Yeah, of course. So this is going to be, I guess, a whole thing about nonlinear career paths, because I just this is going to be totally nonlinear. So I started off, believe it or not, as a songwriter. That was my career. I was playing music for quite some time. Then I figured out two things. A, I really like my country, and B, I'm a very bad singer. So I joined the United States Army. I spent about 4 years overseas as a paratrooper. So if you guys, I don't know if you guys know what those are. Those are the knuckleheads that jump out of airplanes with guns. This is why I'm back in the civilian world now, because I broke my leg doing one of those crazy jumps. And that's where I ended up going to FIU and studying mathematics. I'm actually a math major. And so when I came back to America, I realized I had to get an education. I had to go get internships. I needed experience in order to get a job once I got back. And one of the wonderful things about the government is they have this one website that says, hey, here's all of our jobs, called USA Jobs. And I went on to there, and I saw about like, I don't know, 10, 20 different internship opportunities in NASA alone. And my wife tells me, she goes, what's the worst they can tell you? No. And I said, I guess you're right. So I applied to all of them. All of them were engineering, like mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, optical engineering, some computer engineering. So I said, why not? So I applied to all of them thinking, forget it. This is like an organization that was made for the movies. There's no one on earth the kid from Hialeah is going to be able to get there. And here I am. I got picked up. I got a taste flight center. I had other opportunities to go to the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, but I chose this area because of the opportunities available for everybody. There's like everything for everybody here. There's all the defense contractors, there's all the nonprofit organizations, there's all these consulting firms around here. So if you have like some type of analytical background in engineering, you get a place here in DC. But like I said, I'm a math major, so a lot of my training came on the job. And that's one thing that you coming up here, you might end up doing. You might end up learning exactly like everything you need to do your job, not at school, but at your job. And so you got to be open to do that. And luckily for me, NASA is one of these fantastic organizations that allow you to do that. Like, everybody there expects you to get it wrong the first time, not in a bad way. Like, hey, fail on Earth so you don't fail when you're on your way to Mars. You know what I mean? Because that would be bad. So yeah, just about nonlinearity right there. So there you go.
Yeah, most career paths, at least the interesting ones, are nonlinear. So I'm glad you both share that, and they're both kind of funnily marked by either bad eyesight or bad singing skills led to where you are today, which I enjoy that. So acknowledging that some of the students in the chat are specifically looking for these sorts of roles. Garcia says that they are looking for a summer internship in the field in DC. Sebastian says they would like to be a mechanical engineer for a federal agency. We talked about your specific paths a little bit. Is there anything else either of you would like to share regarding your insights about opportunities for engineers in the region, whether that's insights into your own organization and where they can go to learn about them? And Sirisha, maybe this is where we hear about your interesting story of getting hired. But if you have anything else to say broader as well, Michael, I think you were just talking about some of the different types of entities that exist here, but anything else either of you have to say about what to know as you go navigating the types of organizations that might be looking for engineers here, pros and cons of a government versus a government contractor versus a totally non-government affiliated sort of company, anything at all?
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead. No, you're the vice president. You go first.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that there is quite a variety in DC, just because everyone comes to DC whether it's to talk to policymakers, talk to decision makers, but the biggest customer is here. So there's a lot of companies that have placed offices in DC for that reason. From the aerospace perspective, there's Orbital, which is a launch company. There's a lot of small satellite companies. So like Planet Labs, I don't know if folks have heard of them, but they're doing small sats that are looking at Earth. There's Hawkeye 360, which is a company that's also doing small sats, but they're trying to sell data to the government. So they're based in Virginia. So there's a lot of companies that are doing technical work and have sites located here for the reason to be close to the government. So there's that one bucket, and of course I'll let Michael talk about the government. I'll focus on commercial. But then there's also companies that are looking for technical people, not necessarily for a technical role. And I know Planet has that as well. They have a lot of data scientists in their office here in DC, and there's a lot of business development folks that in our industry, which I think is a little bit different than some others, they are looking for someone with a technical background that can talk knowledgeably about the systems on the fly, as opposed to just like, studying a sheet about your vehicle or something. So there's different paths. My personal recommendation, which is obviously advice I didn't take myself, I would recommend any engineering student stay in engineering, like an actual engineering role, at least 5 to 8 years before going into business development or policy. And I say that because it is use it or lose it. So if you're really not sure, I would first do the technical role. If you hate it, of course, try something else. But if you do the technical role for at least 5 years, maybe 8 years, you can go do business development, policy, anything else without losing that knowledge. And if you hate policy or business development, you can easily go back into an engineering role. So yeah, that would be my advice if you're kind of thinking about whether you want to stay in engineering or not. And of course, and one more thing. Internships are also a really great way to look at policy internships as an engineering student, or business development internships as a technical student as well. VG has a DC office, thus I'm running it. But we do have internships available. This year, unfortunately, we're not doing internships just because we're not going into the office. And I really think for a policy internship, it's useful to be with the people you're working with and going into congressional offices with me and NASA with me. So this year we're not going to do it, but I'm hoping maybe we're going to reassess and maybe we'll have internships open in the fall. And for sure, I'm really banking on having interns next year. So please connect with me on LinkedIn if that's of interest for you in the future.
All right. I see a question in the chat from Sebastian Garcia. And this question always comes up: government versus private company, like what are the pros and cons? All right, so right off the bat, one of the pros for private companies, you're going to get paid a lot more than you are going to be working at the government. I'll give you that right now. But one of the major pros about working for the government, in particular, for instance, NASA, is the type of project you get to work on. For instance, the project I'm working on now is on the LISA spacecraft, and that is have you guys heard about LIGO, about the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Observatory? It measures gravitational waves, right? So it's the same idea, but they throw it up in outer space. So there you go. We do that. I don't know if you can get that type of project on the private side. Like you get to actually like put your thumbprint on one of these things. Even no matter how small it is, you can say like, whoop, I did that. Even if it was to comment a line of code or something like that, or give a small presentation on anything. So that's one of the pros about government work is the type of projects you get to work on. You're not going to be able to get to work on in the private side. I'm not saying the private side is all boring. Like, you got Lockheed Skunk Works here, who probably makes the greatest like aircrafts I've ever seen, especially like the SR-71, but the SR-71 is not going to Mars. You know what I mean? So that's one of the pros of working in the government. And yeah, well, you want to cut your teeth. You want to cut your teeth on the jobs that nobody else is going to want to do, because that's how you're going to get in. If once you get into an organization, you're going to want to do all the jobs nobody else wants to do. And one of those particular jobs that nobody wants to do is code. Like nobody wants to program. Like all the eggheads that do theory and all the chalkboards and they get their pants all dirty, they don't want to code. Learn a code, learn a language. And in particular, learn like a scripting language like MATLAB or Python, because like all of industry is built upon that. If you're in optical engineering or anything, you may want to learn Code 5 or ZMax. That's a design language. But you can get your foot right in the door to saying, hey, I know how to do Python. And, oh, all right, great. Here, analyze this data, plot these charts, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Okay, great. One other bit of advice is when you get into the industry, try to do something that is against what you've learned. I know that's counterintuitive. Try to put yourself in a weird spot. If you're studying mechanical engineering, try to go for a job that's in electrical engineering. Why? Here's the reason why. A, you get to learn things. If you like learning, then that's fantastic. You're going to be starting from zero all over again. Not necessarily from zero, but pretty much close to scratch. But what you're going to be is a boon to your organization, because you're going to be that one person that doesn't know the status quo. You don't know what is the standard operating procedure. So you're going to ask these tangential questions. You're going to ask these you're going to have orthogonal solutions. The things that nobody's thought about, because everybody thinks the same way. Everybody's like, okay, this is how computer engineers think. This is how we do it, blah, 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 blah. And so here comes, Sebastian, for instance, and he's, I don't know what your major is, but let's say you're not a computer engineer. And he says, I'm sorry, what was that? Mechanical engineer. He's like, guys, wait a minute, why do we have to use the CMOS here? Why can't we use something else? Why is this logical circuit having to go this way? Why don't we try this way? And 9 out of 10 times, whoever running the shows will be like, oh yeah, wow, that's actually not a bad idea. And there you go. You just solved the major problem by just not knowing what you were doing, just by asking questions. So when you show up to industry, or you show up to the government and you're doing your job as an engineer or a scientist or an analyst, whatever, one of the major things I always tell everybody, don't be afraid to say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know this. I'm going to find out whether I'm going to do that on my own or I'm going to ask you. Or I'm not going to be afraid to ask the silly question because I'm not some type of expert in this field. In my experience, I work with astrophysicists, optical physicists, computer scientists, and optical engineers. I'm a math major. I have a minor in computer science. I may be able to talk to some of the computer scientists about things, but I am constantly going, what the heck are these people talking about? All the time. So in meetings, I'm always like, guys, what is that? What is this? What is this? And more often not, we get thrown right into a rabbit hole and discuss other types of ways to solve this problem, or like, for instance, we were just having a discussion on what type of optical coding are we going to use. And now it's just because somebody's like, hey, why is this particular, it was like silver, like, how come we're using silver? It has a really crappy track record with humidity. And so like our entire meeting went like 15 minutes into our meeting went to just talking about silver versus gold. And that's how these solutions come up. These solutions come up because you ask the questions. And that's the most important thing about, I guess, doing government work or industry work is show up, be eager to do the crappy jobs, and always ask questions. Don't be afraid to not. That's it.
Awesome stuff, Michael. I really appreciated the kind of specific coding language recommendations and things in there. Sirisha, I'm interested in, so you mentioned that under normal conditions, you would go walking into congressional offices and things like that. And I know a lot of the students here are engineers, but I'm a little biased towards understanding the policy governmental side of things. And I find it interesting that, of the two panelists, you're the one not working in the government, but describing that it's very important for your company's success for you to have access to the government and to liaise with members of Congress. So can you describe on what sort of issues that you would have to engage Congress on? And I have a hunch that some of the issues that some of the students in the chat are interested in are relevant to these things. So for example, Carlos has mentioned a passion for environmentally friendly and sustainable engineering. Eleni mentioned biomedical engineering, and to the extent that humans end up in space, I'm sure there's some concerns there. And someone, I scrolled past it, mentioned passion for cybersecurity. So yeah, what are you engaging Congress about? And are things like the environment, cybersecurity, and medicine part of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So our space industry, as much as we say it's commercial and private, has a lot of dependency on the government still, everything from licensing to being a customer. Virgin Galactic was completely privately funded. So we didn't take any funding money from the government. So we come in from a unique perspective. However, we engage on everything. So let me start with regulatory. We are licensed by the FAA. And this is a new industry. So the FAA, there's still some engagement we do with the FAA to make sure that the regulatory environment is efficient and not overly burdensome, but still accomplishing their mission of safety. So we engage with the FAA on licensing. We engage with NASA as a partner and a customer. They currently fly payloads, research and science payloads on our vehicle. So they are a customer in that sense. So we engage with them on a business development side, but also working together to see how some of the work that they're doing could be done in partnership with commercial industry. So for example, last year, NASA announced that they're going to start a suborbital crew program. And that is a program where they're going to look at flying, like maybe Michael, flying NASA employees on our vehicle to do research and science. So we're engaging with NASA to help build out that program so that they're able to send their employees to space, not only just their astronaut corps to ISS, but actual employees that are doing research into space through suborbital means. And then of course, Congress is the big bucket where we actually lobby. I'm not a registered lobbyist. I employ lobbyists. That's a boring topic about why you need to register, so we're going to skip it. But you go into Congress and we lobby for full funding and increased funding for NASA because they're a customer, and down the line we hope those funds are used to buy commercial services. So we lobby for NASA's budget, especially for programs that we have a particular interest in. But also NASA controls a lot of the regulatory environment as well. So we engage from that perspective. And in addition, we try to encourage, it's all company specific. It always ties back to a company, which is why it's lobbying. But we encourage Congress and our customers and the government to look at programs that use sustainable technology, or start investing in technologies that aren't ready today, but maybe will provide green fuels in the future. So providing our input such that the government utilizes that in their 5-year, 10-year plan, because the government does not operate on they operate on a fiscal year cycle. So what we're lobbying for right now is going to come into play August of next year. So we have to think pretty far ahead when we're working with the government. So they're looking for input, or else they're going to have to guess what we're interested in. So it's a lot of talking, it's a lot of education, it's a lot of partnership back and forth.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
The two questions that have come into the chat are kind of specific to some hiring dynamics. So I'm just going to go ahead and read them so we can kind of hit both. Garcia wanted to know, do we get a security clearance? Which I'll ask as for each of your organizations, do you sometimes need a security clearance? And if so, is there typically support in getting that through the organization? And then, well, I guess we'll go ahead and address that first for both of you. Is that ever a concern, and how do you go about that?
Yeah, there's some there's definitely a need for some security clearance, and it all depends on what it is you're working. If you're working on some really, really secret squirrel stuff, some like cool guy stuff, yeah, you're gonna need a TS for sure. And more often than not, the organization is gonna foot the bill for that because that's pretty pricey. So if you get the opportunity to get a job with a TS, I definitely recommend it because that type of clearance is like really sought after for engineers and computer scientists and all that. So yeah, not everything, but some of the cooler stuff you're gonna need top secret clearance for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Even from, for Virgin Galactic's perspective, we're not a huge DoD. We don't work with the DoD that often, but there are some of our projects where some of our engineers do hold clearances to work on those certain projects. So clearance is definitely not required unless you work for a defense contractor. But if you do want a clearance, I would definitely start looking for the defense contractor companies like, Lockheed, Boeing,
Raytheon,
Raytheon, yep.
L3Harris. I mean, all these the defense contractors definitely need them. A lot of software companies want you to have them too because they're also contracted by the DoD. But yeah, if you can, when you're young, the whole idea is you hopefully you don't get into too much trouble when you're young, and so you can get a TS pretty quickly. Like not pretty quickly, it'll take a couple months, but there won't be any hiccups along the road to getting a TS. And then when you get it, you're on another echelon of projects that you're allowed to do. They'll actually pay you a lot more just because you have that security clearance. So you don't need it to get in, but if you can get it. It'll be very beneficial.
So Adekunle asked kind of a two-parter. They are a construction major. I don't know if either of you would have any specific insights on how a construction major might fit in DC. I imagine both organizations do involve constructing campuses and launch sites and things of that nature. So anything you might know there. But they're also an international student, and international students sometimes face unique opportunities and challenges in hiring. So anything you might be able to say to specific opportunities international students might be best suited for, or if there are any, if you need to be a citizen at your organizations respectively for some or all roles, etc.
Yeah, I don't have too much insight, unfortunately, on the construction management. I know there's probably a lot of opportunities because they're always building things in DC. Yeah. There's like there's always a crane somewhere in the sky. So I don't have any particular insight on that, unfortunately. We typically, we're a unique vehicle. We actually take off and land on a runway. So we actually don't need a lot of infrastructure to launch, but I know there's spaceports being built in so many different states and internationally as well. It's something I'm actually working with the FAA on, is how do we look at, our regulatory environments in the US and maybe apply those and work with international partners so that US vehicles can fly out of different spaceports. I know there's a lot of interest in building up infrastructure and spaceports internationally. So there's definitely an intersection there from that perspective. On the international student side, I'll probably toss it over to Michael because unfortunately we are held to ITAR, and right now we do have a requirement that you have to be a U.S. citizen for those purposes. But I don't see that being the case moving forward. I think, especially on the commercial space side, it is going to be a global industry, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities moving forward in that space.
Yeah. That's one of those things. Yeah, you're right. Where working for the government, you need to be a U.S. citizen, to get a job anywhere in the United States government. That doesn't mean you can't work with them and with private organizations. I'm a firm believer in the next. I've been saying this for 2-3 years now. Like within 5 years, the space industry is just going to blow up, and there's just going to be a call for just about almost every single person you can imagine. I don't have any particular insight or understanding of construction. However, I could just take a gander here and say, there's a major program going on called Artemis. I'm sure you guys heard about it, where we're going to go back to the moon and, put a Walmart on the moon at some point. So we got to build buildings, right? People are going to live up there. So how do we build them? I don't know how. All I know is I know how to differentiate and integrate. I can prove some mathematical statements, but we're going to need people who know how to build that stuff and design it with materials that are available. And that would be a major challenge. So as far as opportunities are concerned, there's always going to be opportunity. You just maybe have to kind of see just further than the corner of the street. You got to go further and see that, oh yeah, if our plan as a species is to go to Mars, well, we're going to need a place to live there. We're going to need a way to develop roads. How do we drive from moon base here to moon base over there? How do we build what are they called? Greenhouses, I guess. I don't know if you can build a greenhouse on the moon, but I guess we're going to need that stuff. And I think, Eric, did you mention something about cybersecurity earlier?
There was someone in here who mentioned cybersecurity. It was Carlos, strong interest in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I couldn't find the comment. It was both cybersecurity and sustainability. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if you guys maybe or may not be aware, but they're building Wi-Fi for the moon. They're doing this to expedite communications. Why? Because that's what they're planning. They're planning ahead. All these things take like years in advance of planning. So they're planning ahead before we even send the first knuckleheads back to the moon to put Wi-Fi up there so we can, talk to these people and send information as quickly as possible. And they can send information back. So we don't want anybody to jump on that. And if we don't want anybody to get the password for the moon, because then, how are the astronauts going to stream their videos? So we need to be able to have that secured. And that's one of those things that it's like, again, you got to think about it on a bigger scale. When you think about opportunities in DC, it is on a larger time frame. It's almost geological time frame. Like things take a really long time over here. Like the project I'm working on won't launch for another 12 years. So it's a long time frame. So for the construction major out there, think ahead, think further down the line. Like what is an odd place that my skills can be put to use in? What odd place is space,
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Recently I saw, like this week, I saw NASA put out a request for information from companies on how to quickly put up infrastructure on the moon. So it's actually not that far ahead anymore. NASA is already asking for companies' ideas on that. So there could be, companies like Boeing and Blue Origin, on all those that are interested in going to the moon are going to start thinking about that like today, if not they haven't already.
Yeah, definitely. The moon it's a giant ball of silica up there. So we got to figure out how we're going to use that stuff up there, because we can't, it gets pretty expensive to send, stuff up there. So we're going to need to have that infrastructure in place where we can say, all right, you guys are here, enjoy it, don't break the place.
Sirisha, while we wait for another question, I think we are waiting on your what sounds like very fun how you got Virgin to hire you story. That hasn't come up yet, right?
Yeah. So when I was ready to move on from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, I started interviewing around, and I got a few job offers. I got a couple technical ones and one like a business development one. And Virgin didn't even offer me an interview. And, I was like, okay, well, I've got like 3 awesome job offers in front of me. I should take one. And then in the back of my mind, I was like, well, this might be the closest I'm going to be to like Virgin Galactic if I take, I don't know when I'm going to have this opportunity again. So before I took one of those offers, I just wrote a note to the CEO And I just wrote an email. It was very respectful, and I just kind of laid out how I'm interested in the company, how I could help. Oh, sorry, I skipped a step. Before that, I met the government affairs person in DC, and I asked him, I was like, I really want to work for Galactic. And he's like, I would hire you, but I don't have the budget, and I don't have a job for you. So that's when I was like, okay. So I opened this email, wrote this long email to the CEO, said, hey, I really want to work for Virgin Galactic. It's been a dream of mine. By the way, there's all these things I could do for you here in DC that you can't do with a one-person team. And I sent it, and then, no response from the CEO, but I got a response from the government affairs person saying, hey, really weird. I got this okay to hire you. And I was like, oh, interesting. So he hired me, and that's how I started at Virgin Galactic. So I'm not saying it's probably the most successful route for everybody, but it's always been a dream of mine. And I thought, what do again, like as Michael said, what can they do? They'll say no. And I decided I wanted to at least try before giving up and going and taking something else. So it worked out for me that time. And I will say, I've written multiple notes to now that I have my job, and I am talking to a lot of CEOs. That doesn't always work. So, so I was very surprised that it worked. And sometimes you just have to be bold.
That's quite the story. It kind of reminds me on a previous one of these. One of our panelists said that their advice for networking is to be both bold and fearless and respectful. I think was fearless and considerate, or fearless and respectful. So I think this is an example of that. You just went for it all the way to the top, and I'm sure the message was, in addition to being well researched, as you mentioned, what they needed capacity wise was thinking of what their needs were and was respectful, and you put those two things together. Some cool things can happen.
Yeah, and I had met the CEO at a networking event, and that's another item. Once we get back to a post-pandemic world, I know it's really difficult right now to network, but always, again, be respectful. But I know a lot of people are scared to go up to somebody that they think doesn't want to talk to them because they're a CEO or an astronaut or something. But it doesn't hurt to, if they're not in a serious conversation, go up and just introduce yourself, and just very short introduction, say what you do, or where you're studying, what you want to do, and you might have a chance to stay, get their contact information. And if you do, stay in touch. That's how, I got, the CEO at the time, George's card, had worked with him and met him at multiple network events, and he wouldn't always respond, but every once in a while, if I saw an article of something that Virgin Galactic did, I would just send them a note and say, hey, congratulations. So always follow up. They might not respond, but it's always good to keep those connections.
So that sort of just sending a note thing, I really like. It's occurring to me as you say that, Sirisha, that I might not know you today if I didn't do that with another contact recently, because it was maybe 3 or 4 months ago that I saw a Axios space newsletter that mentioned something about space industry. Actually, it was some sort of virtual event or conference on the future of the space industry. I forwarded that to our alumnus, Santiago Foldvari, who's at the Australian Embassy, and simply said, there was no ask, there was no I need anything, it was just, hey, you probably already get this newsletter, but this event reminded me of you. And it was from there that he responded that, hey, we should do an event together. And that was an event that was a week ago that he was a part of. And then he ended up suggesting you for this panel. And so that sort of just, hey, professional exchange. Here's something that reminded me of you. I think people can really like and respond to. I'm going to turn over to Valeria, who has a question or two that she'll ask directly.
Hi, how are you? It's really nice seeing you guys. I actually have 2 questions. And how do you recommend staying up to date in the field, such as, podcasts, newsletter, associations, etc.? And well, the other I'll let you guys answer this one. I'll move on to the other one.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Say your other question. Go ahead.
Well, the other one is like, how do you see the industry changing in the next 5 years?
Well, depends on what your field is. If you want to stay up to date, you might want to be really good at speed reading, because at least from my end, it's, you know, what's the project I'm working on? What am I doing? And you can go to like archives.org, the Cornell database for scientific paperworks, or ACM is one of the professional societies for for computers, and just read as much as you can. You're not the only person on the planet doing what it is you're doing. There's thousands of people doing it. So the way to stay up to date is just go look for papers and read them. Read them. You may not understand half of it, to be honest with you. They may be beyond you. There's plenty of papers that are beyond me. And I'm like, okay, but I just pray that it seeps in and stays inside for later use. So read a lot. It's whatever you're interested in. There's a journal out there for it. And if you're interested in space, you go to Space News, Axios. You can look up almost anything as far as astrophysics is concerned, physics, and you'll find something and you can say it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I agree. I think, depending on your field, but if it is space, totally second Space News. They have a daily email from Jeff Faust, who's also a reporter you should follow on Twitter if you are interested in space news. His last name is Foust, Faust. That daily email is just like, hey, here's 5 things that may be interesting in the space world. And those kind of newsletters, I subscribe to probably more than I should, but it's part of my job to stay up to date on current events. But those kind of newsletters are awesome, especially for space. Space News is awesome because it's government, commercial, defense, like international, here's what's happening in space. And those kind of top level, staying up to date is great, especially when you're networking, because you always need, as much as I hate small talk, sometimes you need it to start a conversation. So keeping up to date on what's happening, you can walk up to anybody and be like, hey, what's your opinion on, the Hope Mars mission? That just, so that kind of thing, I just totally recommend.
Yeah, my field is, I'm doing my master's in global affairs and globalization and security. So I just found about the space policy, and I mean, you're like an example of probably what I want to do with my life. It seems very interesting and it's very, very cool. So I think that's more my road into what I want to do when I graduate.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm looking for internships and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I would recommend Secure World Foundation. So they're a nonprofit organization in DC that focuses on space for a more sustainable future. And it's, global. So they're not just focusing on the US. They do have internships, and I'm happy to connect you with some of those folks. It's awesome. They're looking at everything from, water security to climate change to how we can use space assets to help the world and the people in it.
I was researching, and then I came up across a space generation advisory council, and they have groups about ethics and human rights in space. So I feel like there's a way, like, super interesting field. And then I appreciate you giving me this recommendation. I'm totally gonna look it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to connect you with someone there too. And Space Generation Advisory Council also +1 on that. I was involved very early in my career, and it's how I grew my network. Awesome. Totally awesome. You meet so many people, like-minded people all over the world. And I know it's always cool to network with CEOs and leadership, but I really value networking with peers, because they're going to be growing with you in this career. And who knows, like, you could be the next NASA administrator, or the person your best friend right now could become the NASA administrator. Like, everyone's helping each other when we're at the stage in our careers. So it was really great to join SGAC. And I would recommend not only joining, but get involved. So take on a leadership position, or take on a position organizing a workshop. I traveled to multiple conferences all over the world with SGAC, and amazing.
That is super cool. I mean,
yep.
I would have never thought that space and perhaps human rights or ethics were a thing. Space policy, space law, like that's just such an interesting subject. And I think space is such a broad place for any major, like not only STEM majors, but we can see like the variety and the diversity of majors that can work on these areas. So thank you so much for taking your time. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
It looks like Alex has a question that follows up on some comments we've had already about how things are different now with meeting people at an event or conference. Alex, I can ask for you if not, but are you around to ask that on video to them?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what would you say is the best way to like network during the pandemic? Because there's no conferences and there's no like meeting events. So, other than like just reaching out through LinkedIn and all of these platforms, what would you say is another good way to reach out to these people that are important for us to have as connections?
Okay. This one of my favorite ways is going back to what I was saying about staying on top of things. When you're reading these papers that are published by your peers or some other, dude or dudette writing these really cool things, email them. Email them. Hey, I really thought this paper was cool. Can you help me clear up these things? I guarantee you, man, they would love that. They love that stuff. They love it. They're like, oh my God, somebody read my paper. At least somebody read my paper, is interested in it. They're going to write you back and you got a friend right there. So one of the best things to do is to, whatever your field is and you're researching, reach out, email these authors that you're reading and say, hey, I really like your idea, or I really enjoy what you wrote. But I would, maybe you have an opinion about it or something, yada, yada, yada. Or you say, hey, I had no idea what this meant. Can you clear this up for me? And 100% of the time, they're going to email you back like, oh, thank you so much for reading. Yeah, I have no problems clearing this up for you. And you can start a dialogue that way. In this kind of like pandemic world of ours, the best way to communicate is via email, via the computer nowadays. So until then, that's probably the best. And even afterward, I would say still continue to do that, because your network doesn't necessarily have to be in the same state or let alone the same county. Your network can be, you can have peers working in Europe, working in Asia, working in Australia, all over the world. So just email these authors. They're more than happy to provide you any feedback you have on their paper, on like whatever questions you have on their paper, and they're just happy to have someone talk about it.
Yeah, and also so I would also say SGAC is a good one. They actually hold, they're still holding like virtual conferences, and I was participating in one like 3 or 4 months ago where it was small groups talking with professionals in industry. So I would look at some of the conferences that are going on. It's easier to attend them now since most of them are virtual and you don't have to travel and pay an exorbitant amount of money to attend. And a lot of them are free for students. So just look at different industries that you're interested in and look at the virtual conferences and attend a few. A lot of them are doing virtual networking sessions as well. So that's probably easier to go to conferences and do some of that now in a pandemic world, since you don't have to travel. And I want to plug it. So this is totally off topic, but I forgot to make a plug earlier, and I'm going to make a plug real quick. For anyone looking to for internships, there's these past couple of years, a ton of programs have showed up. I co-founded Matthew Asakot's fellowship program, which is for juniors, seniors, graduates that want to do an internship in the commercial space industry. And we also offer you a mentor, and we offer a summit where you can network as well with the industry. And throughout the whole year, we connect you with people in industry so you learn more about different facets. But not only that, there's Brooke Owens Fellowship, which is for women that want to get into a technical aerospace industry, and that one's open for international students as well. So we'd definitely check out Brooke Owens Fellowship if anyone's interested. And recently, Patty Grace Smith has shown up as well, and Zed's Fellowship. So if anyone's looking at an internship in the aerospace industry, there's a lot of options that have come up in the form of fellowship programs that offer not only an internship, but mentorship and a network. So those are really good opportunities, and maybe I'll write them in the chat so you guys can have them.
Yeah, if you have a chance to get them in the chat before we're done, I'm sure they appreciate that. Also, I can get all the emails of those who signed in through my Zoom portal. So if you get them to me, I can also follow up with everyone who logged in today. Since we are at the 4 o'clock, I want to say to all those who were also on this note of searching for internships, while our panel today was really focused on the space side of things, there are opportunities in DC for everyone. So a couple of links that I just put in the chat. talentlab.fiu.edu is the homepage for all of FIU and DC student programs, including how to let us know you're interested in internships and get signed up for our newsletter that has internships. I see some folks are asking about biomedical engineering, for example. So I also put the MailChimp link to yesterday's newsletter. So if you let us know on our website you're interested in internships, you can start getting our newsletter. There is something from the American Medical Association in there, for example, that could be of interest to biomedical folks. I also put the link to the National Institutes of Health internship and fellowships website for someone interested in biomedical engineering. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me as far as a DC area federal agency focused on health. So nih.gov is there. I also put my email address, eric@fiu.edu. I can help people with more specific to their interests if this was your first interaction with us. So I really appreciate all the great questions from the students and all the students introducing themselves and their interests. And I most particularly appreciate Sirisha, meeting you and knowing you're leading a great team here in Washington, and hope we can interact with you again. And whether it's at your organization at Virgin Galactic or any of these fellowship programs, feel free to send them to me anytime you'd like me to get them out to the FIU community. I'd be glad to do that. And Michael, our proud alumnus, welcome to the DC area, and thank you for taking the time to do this, and a pleasure to see you as always. Thank you both, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Nice to meet you. See you around. Bye, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eric. You are awesome as always.
Couldn't do it without you, Julie.
I try. I work on the back end, you know. All right. Bye, guys.